Hi, everyone. Welcome to Writer of the Week. Today we are here with Lizbeth Meredith, author of Pieces of Me. Welcome, Lizbeth. How are you today?
Very well. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
It's a real pleasure having you here. So, I was wondering if you could tell us something about the backstory to this book before we jump into the more formal questions.
I would love to. In 1994, I was 4 years out of an abusive relationship, and I thought I had the world by the tail. I was off public assistance, and my kids were a little bit older. They were 4 and 6 years old, and I worked at the battered women's shelter where we had fled to 4 years previously. When I went to pick the girls up from daycare one day, they were gone. And they weren't just gone from Alaska, they were gone from America. They were in Greece with their non-custodial father. They had become the unintended consequences of my leaving him. And so Pieces of Me is largely about the amazing community response that people across the globe, really, in Greece, in Alaska, in America, and Germany even, people joined forces and set aside their differences to help me reunite with my little girls.
Can you give us a brief plot outline, of the brief synopsis of what the material that the book covers?
Absolutely. My book not only covers that 2 year period of time, but it really flashes back to my own childhood as a kidnapped child. I was taken from one parent and spirited away to Alaska, and my name was changed. And when I grew up, I knew one thing was for sure, that I would never subject my kids to divorce, to domestic violence, to a parental abduction. And instead, what happened was I hadn't done my homework. I hadn't healed personally. And so I replicated my childhood traumas and kind of amplified them even worse. And so Pieces of Me is not just about the girls' abduction, but also about finding myself and about healing from trauma and creating the future that my daughters definitely deserved.
So this is a very difficult subject matter, but it's also one of the most interesting books I've ever come across. Can you tell us what you did in the immediate time after finding out that your daughters were gone? Like, how did you know where they were? Did he call you? And
That's a good question, Melissa. I participated in a long-term study of left behind parents whose kids had been abducted and taken across the globe. Normally, an abducting parent, whether it's a mother or a father, will call the left behind parent. I was one of the minority parents. For 2 years, I never heard one thing from my children's father or from my children. So after my kids weren't at daycare, I waited, I looked around, I called some people, that called the police, and they said, look, lady, basically he's the father. Why can't you just understand? He probably wants to be with your daughters extra. They're his kids too. And so I really had to work and make them understand this wasn't your average co-parenting situation between decent people. This was scary and diabolical. And my former husband had long ago threatened to take the girls and disappear should I ever leave him. And so, in fact, the worst had happened.
and so, what was the catalyst that made you decide to turn your life story into a book?
Well, it's a good question, Melissa. I loved stories as a child, and I wrote tragic poetry in my kind of awful childhood. And, I loved the idea of being a writer. I feel like a cat has just entered the room. I apologize. So I was a journalism major in college. I loved stories, and my life had been rough enough that it was easier for me to detach from my life and to think of it as a story rather than to consider it as being mine. When my daughters went missing, I kept rewriting the ending over and over. And every time the girls were getting off the plane coming back to America and people were welcoming us, and it was an amazing new beginning. And so that's when I knew I had to write our story, and I wrote it in my head over and over and over.
And was there anything that surprised you along the way in the actual process of writing it?
Yes, it surprised me a lot how hard it was. I mean, even though I had some education in journalism, that wasn't nearly enough to write a book. And I took a long time. My children were well, I should say I was 31 by the time my daughters came back from Greece. They had been gone 2 years, and I started writing the book little by little, and I was terrible at it, thank God. And what I didn't realize was I was such an angry young woman at the time. I was so mad, and I was so devastated with all the ruin that our life appeared to be. And so I wanted to get even. And I wrote the book initially with spite and retribution in my mind. And I took writing classes, additional ones, and the girls and I pursued therapy, and I did many things. So over the passage of time, we began healing, and I wasn't an angry young woman. I was an older woman with some wisdom, and I understood government issues and domestic abuse and healing from trauma a lot better. By the time the book was a good book to read with a lot of good takeaways for my readers, the entire world of publishing had changed. So nobody really wanted memoirs. It was hard to find a publisher for a memoir because so much had happened in the world of publishing. It seemed like a horrible thing that it took me 20 plus years to write my book. And yet really, it was perfect. New research had been developed about healing from trauma. So I start the book in present day, finish it in present day. And it didn't end with, oh, the kids got off the plane, happily ever after, the end. It really delved into what's it like to heal from trauma. It turns out that somebody who can navigate government issues nationally, statewide, internationally, can probably deal with the land of publishing and with the changing tides of publishing. So it was all right. I had a lot of, good skills about landing on my feet. And for that, I was grateful.
Were you self-published, or did you go hybrid, or how did you publish your book?
I initially tried with trying to find an agent, trying to find a publisher, and then I went with She Writes Press. And I was so and am so glad that I did. Because in She Writes Press, I had access to beautiful traditional publishing distribution, but I had more say, really. I had more authority on certain, like the back cover information, how my public relations campaign would go. I got to help with the cover and with metadata. And She Writes Press gave me an entire university education, it felt like, on the world of publishing. And I loved it. And I ended up with a sisterhood of amazing writers who are part of my support system and part of my extended family now.
And who are your readers, and what do you want them to take away from the book?
My readers, I intended for my readers to be women about the ages of 22 to about 72, I thought. And then I started getting online reviews from men, and then men started coming to my book events. And I really did a lot of events that first 12 months around the country. My youngest reader who bought a book, I think was this last Easter, she was in 4th grade. And the youngest one to show up at a book group was 11 years old. I want my readers to understand there are universal takeaways from them. I want them to understand and remember that there was a time in our history when we put our differences aside, whether it was religious differences, sexual orientation, age, race, whatever, that people literally united for a common cause and didn't worry about all of the other things that separated us. And when that happened, the impossible can occur. And it still can occur. I think sometimes about how the internet and sometimes this current world is very, very divided. But Pieces of Me recollects a time when we united for a common cause. And I never want to forget that.
It's a very empowering message. Lizbeth's book is available on Amazon. And if you want to find out more, you can go to her website, lameredith.com. Thank you so much for being with us today, and we wish you a lot of success with the book.
I thank you so much. And just so you know, the book really is available wherever books are sold. So people, so people can know, and it's available on audiobook too. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you so much.
Have a great day.